hunter. Your bullets have no bite, no penetration.
The Xbox 360 and PS3 generation hit at a very specific time for me. I'm 31 now, so that era was basically my middle school and high school years. I'd already spent a lot of time with the PS1 and PS2 as a kid, but the 360 became the console that I really associate with being a teenager. Online gaming was blowing up, everyone was jumping into party chats, and games still had this strange sense that almost anything could happen. That generation had a lot of trends that were being repeated, but it also had a lot of weird one-offs. Shadows of the Damned always sat in that area for me. It was a third-person shooter, a roller coaster ride through hell, a crude comedy, and a horror game all kinda smashed together. And when I played it back then, I was exactly the right age for it. And the jokes, the weapons, the demon designs, the music, the whole attitude of everything. It clicked with me pretty fast. And for years, I never really understood why it didn't get bigger. It had huge names behind it. You had people connected to Resident Evil, Silent Hill, and No More Heroes all attached to this one strange action horror project. You know, on the surface, that really sounds like the kind of game people would still talk about constantly. Instead, though, it became one of those cult games that mostly only gets brought up by people who already know about it. And that's what makes it interesting to go back to now, because Shadows of the Damned is rough in spots. It's juvenile, loud, it's very clearly a product of its time, but also has this confidence and personality that a lot of games would never even attempt. So let's look at it from a neutral place. Who made it? What was it trying to do? Why did it feel strange even back then? And why has it stayed in that hidden gem category for so long? What was Shadows of the Damned?
You let my onion go now, stranger, and maybe I would blow your head off nicely.
So to really get into why this game exists, I think we gotta go back and look at how this thing even came together. Because this was a Grasshopper manufacturer game, published by EA, and that already puts it in a pretty odd place. Grasshopper had built its name on games with a ton of personality. EA was one of the biggest publishers in the industry, and at that time, they were still trying to bring certain Japanese developed projects to a bigger console audience. So before you even get into the game itself, you already have this strange mix of a studio known for these unusual creative ideas, and a publisher trying to package that into something people could understand. And then we get into the actual names attached to it. The reveal for the game put Suda51, Shinji Mikami, and Akira Yamaoka right at the front. That was basically the pitch. You had Suda, who people knew from No More Heroes, the legendary Mikami, who everyone knew from Resident Evil, and Yamaoka, who scored almost every Silent Hill title. So the game was being introduced with this built-in sense of high expectations before most people even knew what it actually was.
Dulcet tones, how lovely.
And to me, those names are extremely important here. Suda's work has a very specific vibe to it. His games are usually crude and odd, but also extremely violent and funny in a way that makes them unforgettable. There's always this feeling that his games are trying to push so much in your face just to see how far they can take it. So when his name is on something like this, you already expect it to have some of that over-the-top, almost punk energy. And Mikami brings a completely different expectation. By this point, RE4 had already changed a lot in gaming. The camera, enemy pressure, pacing, and the way a horror game could feel like a forward-moving shooter. While he didn't create all those things individually, I feel like the way they're packaged together is tied to his name. So with him attached to this, people were naturally going to look at Shadows of the Damned and expect some of that action horror structure to be mixed in. And then there's Yamaoka, which adds another layer to all this. His name is always going to make people think of Silent Hill, but this game uses him in a different way. This is a lot louder and messier. It has horror in it, but it also has this very aggressive, almost grimy energy to it. EA even used the phrase psychopunk when promoting the game, and honestly, that gets pretty close to the lane they were aiming for. It needed to be kind of scary, but at the same time, it had to sound ugly, funny, distorted, and chaotic. But looking deeper into it, this was more than just having 3 big names on a title. Massimo Guarani was the director, and I think he's important to bring up because he helps explain why the final game feels the way it does. In some interviews, he talked about the project as something built from different creative visions being merged together, and when you play it, that really makes sense.
What the fuck?
I think it's also worth looking at where the idea started, because Shadows of the Dam came out of an early concept called Kuriyami. Suda talked about this over the last few years. He said Shadows of the Dam came out from the 6th draft of that idea, and I really think that says a lot. The version we got wasn't the first version of the concept. It had been worked over, changed, revised, and pushed into a completely different shape. From what's been said about Kuriyami, that earlier idea was darker and more rooted in horror, isolation, and surreal atmosphere. The cool thing to me is that you can still feel pieces of that here in the final game, especially with the way the darkness is treated like something dangerous and active. But by the time it became Shadows of the Damned, the game had moved into a much louder direction. It became a third-person action shooter with horror wrapped around it. The darker concept is still under there, but the final game is faster, dirtier, and a lot more aggressive. There were also some issues on the publisher side. Suda talked about a lot of friction with EA during development. He said there was always arguments, these compromises, and both sides having to adjust. I don't really think that automatically turns the story into the original idea was ruined, or anything like that. I feel like it just means that the game we got came out of negotiation. It was shaped by ambition, but also by the need to turn a strange concept into a sellable console game. And when you play it, all that makes sense. There are parts of Shadows of the Damned where you can feel the darker horror game underneath. Then there are parts where it swerves hard into dirty jokes, comedy, and this Grindhouse vibe. And I think that mix is exactly what gives the game its personality. Sometimes you can feel the rough areas, but either way, it creates something very specific.
That doesn't smell like pork, unless she stopped showering.
Once the game actually gets going, the first thing that really stands out is the way it treats hell. This version of hell feels like this chaotic road trip through a bunch of themed nightmares. Every main chapter has its own vibe and flavor. The game keeps moving you into a new area, giving you a new visual idea, and then throwing some dirty joke or strange enemy at you, and then you just move on. That rhythm is a big part of what makes Shadows of the Damned feel like Shadows of the Damned.
The darkness really did a number on that brute. Boy, for a second there, I thought we were... Ew, gross! Are those demons crawling out of his...
You're usually moving in a pretty direct line. The game is built around always pushing you forward. You enter an area, deal with whatever's in front of you, maybe solve a small problem or find something to open the next path, then you keep going. It never really asks you to stay in one location for a long time. It wants the trip to keep changing, and for this game I feel like that works. Because the world itself is so loud and absurd that staying in one place too long would probably make the tone wear thin. The game seems to understand that. It gives each area enough personality to stand out, then moves before that idea gets stretched too far.
This is when I still have flashy parts.
Johnson, that's sick.
Just get me to a phone! This boner needs a booster!
There are locked doors and small objectives, but they usually exist to slow the pace down for a minute rather than turn the level into a larger maze. That's where the eyeballs, brains, strawberries, and other keys come in.
Gimme! Oh, these things are like demon catnip when I was little.
Johnson, do I take this strawberry?
Yes! Jeez, excuse me for having a little fruit fantasy.
You know, on the surface, those sound like classic horror game progression items. You need a strange object to open a strange door. And the world is full of gross little locks and gates. Really though, they feel more like pacing tools. You're usually running around figuring out where the item is, killing what gets in the way, and then getting back to the main route to open the door. It gives you a quick objective without changing the whole shape of the game. And I think that's really important for understanding what Shadows of the Damned is doing. The game uses horror adventure language with keys, doors, weird objects, and environmental interaction, but it uses those pieces in a much faster way. The items gives the level a small loop. They make you pause, look around, and interact with the area for a second. Then the game pushes you along. The environmental puzzles work in a similar way. They're usually there to interrupt the shooting for a short bit, and just to give the area a little bit more texture. You could be dealing with darkness and light, or switches, timing, or moving platforms. They usually aren't really complicated, and I don't think they're trying to be. They're there to keep the ride from just becoming one fight after another stacked on top of each other. And that's the balance the game keeps playing with. It wants to be fast, and it wants to keep throwing things at you, but it also needs some kind of structure between the fights. So the puzzles and key items become these little breathers. They give you a reason to engage with the level without asking you to fully analyze it. That also fits the way the game handles the tone. The dirty humor is everywhere. Your companion, Johnson, he jokes all the time. The demons are vulgar, there's sexual gags, these insane names like One-Eyed Willie, he's your checkpoint character. These weird props and little visual jokes, they're just consistently filling the world during and between the action. It's everywhere at all times. It doesn't save it just for cutscenes.
Willie! That's One-Eyed William!
Friend of yours?
Are you kidding? William is my aunt's first husband's adopted son from the Ukraine.
That's a big part of why the tone feels so committed. A lot of games use jokes as little breaks from the main experience. Shadows of the Dam makes the jokes part of the experience. That kind of commitment is also why the world works better than it probably should. If the game treated hell like a serious horror setting one minute and then threw in these jokes the next, the tone would fall apart really fast. Instead, everything is already operating at this ridiculous level. So when the game asks you to feed a brain to a baby-faced door or chase down some weird object to move forward, it feels like part of the same world. Hey, just real quick, if you made it this far into the video, thank you for hanging out with me for a bit. If you're enjoying it, consider subbing. There's already a lot of content on the channel like this, and there's always more coming. And if you want to help the video grow, leave it a like and drop a comment. Let me know if you've ever played this game before, what you think about it, or if this is your first time seeing it. I love reading y'all's comments. But let's get back into it and talk about the main system in the game, Johnson.
Says the former demon. What's wrong? Lost your spine?
Okay, look. If you want to go to the Underworld, good on you.
So to really get into how the game works moment to moment, we have to talk about Johnson. Because he's doing a lot more than just following Garcia around and making jokes. He's the companion, the guide, the light source, the weapon system, and the main place where progression starts showing up during gameplay. And when one character is handling that many parts of the experience, he naturally becomes the thing the whole game keeps coming back to.
What can I say, Johnson? You are the right tool for every job.
Garcia works because he's direct. He's a demon hunter, he loves Paula. He's angry enough and stubborn enough to walk straight into hell to get her back. That gives the game a clear drive from the start. We always understand why he's moving and what he wants. Johnson is what gives that journey its rhythm. He feels like Garcia's friend. And I feel like this whole setup that's really important. The way they talk to each other makes it feel like there's already history there. Johnson is constantly reacting to what's happening, poking at Garcia, making dirty jokes, and giving the game that second voice it needs while we're moving through all these weird places. He also works as the guide through hell. When the game needs to explain something, Johnson usually becomes the way it does that. He can point Garcia towards what matters in a room, explain how some role works, or react to whatever strange thing is blocking the path. And because he already has that friendship with Garcia, those explanations feel more natural inside the scene.
Whoa, who did this? Mr. X?
That's where the character starts blending into the mechanics. Johnson is the thing Garcia is talking to, but he's also the thing Garcia is using. He becomes the gun, the torch. He can fire the light shot. He's tied directly into the way you move through darkness, the way you handle enemies, and the way the game gives you new tools over time. And really, I think that's one of the smartest choices in the game. All these systems could have been separate menus, separate weapons, tools, separate tutorial prompts, but the game puts most of that inside Johnson, so the game's personality and mechanics keep meeting in the same place. The weapons are the clearest example of that. Johnson's different forms are all built around the same body part theme. Bones, teeth, skulls. Everything still feels like it comes from him, so when you change weapons, it feels like Johnson is changing shape instead of Garcia just pulling out another gun. And that really fits the game perfectly. The weapon forms each have their own use, and the important thing is that they give you different answers depending on what the game is throwing at you. One form leans more towards control, another form helps you keep pressure on the enemies, and then you have one that clears space when enemies start crowding you. Then the boss progression upgrades start giving those forms utility. That's where the weapons start to feel like tools instead of only damage options. The pistol form, the boner, eventually gets charge shots that can break cracked walls or deal with enemy armor. The other forms also start gaining extra functions as they evolve, so Johnson becomes more useful in the world and in combat at the same time. That makes the upgrades feel meaningful. You're not only making damage numbers go up, you're expanding what Johnson can actually do. And because Johnson is a character, those upgrades feel a little more physical than they would in a normal weapon menu. The game keeps tying progression back to him, and that helps the whole system feel more connected. The gems are a big part of that. White gems are basically the money you collect while moving through the game. Red gems are used for upgrades, and those are the ones I cared the most about. Damage, ammo capacity, and those kinds of improvements make a real difference once you start putting them into the weapons and Garcia's survivability. You can fill those upgrades as you go. The weapons will start hitting harder, you get more room to work with, you can stay in fights longer before needing to reload or recover. It gives the combat a steady sense of growth, and that matters in a game that keeps throwing more aggressive encounters at you. The blue gems feel different because they're tied to Johnson's larger weapon evolution. The detail I really like is that Johnson wears those blue gems in his face. That is such a specific Shadows of the Dam thing. A normal upgrade could have just happened in a menu, but here, the game makes it feel like Johnson himself is being changed by the progression. There's a really cool visual side to the weapon evolution as well. A lot of the blue gem upgrades change how the weapons look, so you can actually see Johnson evolving. The upgrade system becomes part of the character's design instead of something that only exists behind the scenes. It fits the rest of the game's style because even progression has to look a little gross and strange. Then you have Christopher, he's the merchant. He sells ammo, health, and red gems. The system's pretty easy to understand once you're in the game. For me, ammo and healing items showed up enough in the world that I usually just saved white gems for red gems. That made the shop feel more tied to the upgrade system than survival.
Y'all take care now.
Vending machines land in a similar place. Here in Hell, your health item is alcohol. And healing through alcohol just fits Garcia. It fits the tone of the game. I didn't really feel the need to use the vending machines constantly because there were healing items everywhere. But the idea itself still works. Even a basic healing station gets filtered through the same dirty, ridiculous personality as everything else. And that's really the point with Johnson and the systems around him. The game keeps taking normal action game functions and giving them a character. Your weapons have a voice, your light source has a personality. Your upgrades have a physical place to go. Your guide through hell is also the thing you aim at demons. That all gives the game a stronger identity. And all of that's why I really feel like Johnson deserves his own chapter here. He's more than just a comic relief or someone for Garcia to talk to. He's the way Shadows of the Dam connects its tone to the way it plays. The jokes, guidance, weapons, light, and the upgrades all run through him. So after talking about our Johnson, I think the next thing that really matters is the darkness system, because this is where the game gets most of its actual pressure from. The game's already super loud and really fast, and the enemies can run up on you pretty quickly, but darkness changes the way you look at the area around you. It turns the room itself into something you have to pay attention to.
Much better. No darkness and, dare I say it, no demons.
When Garcia is standing in darkness, he starts taking damage over time. And yeah, I know that sounds pretty simple, and mechanically it is, but it really changes the way an area feels. The second darkness takes over an area, you start looking for a way out. You're looking for a safe pocket, or a way to cleanse the darkness. You're trying to figure out where enemies are coming from while also paying attention to the thing draining your health. That gives the game a timer without actually putting a clock on the screen. You can feel the pressure because Garcia can only stay in the darkness for so long. So even when the actual objective is simple, the darkness makes it feel more urgent. You're moving faster, reacting a bit more in a panicked way, and making decisions before you fully settled into the room. The mounted goat heads are a big part of that. When you find one, it becomes this little safety point in the area. Activating it clears the darkness and gives the space back to you for a second. And I like that because it makes the environment feel active. You're using light to take control of the room, and that just really fits the game. It also gives exploration a little bit of pressure. You might be running through a dark area, taking damage, trying to find where the game wants you to go, and then you see the goat head mounted somewhere in the room. That moment has a very clear feeling to it. You know the space is about to open back up once you reach it, so getting there becomes the priority. Some enemies are wrapped in darkness also, so before you can really deal with them, you have to cleanse them with the light shot. That gives a fight a small extra step. You're reading the enemy, clearing the darkness off them, then handling the actual threat. It's simple, but it makes the combat feel more active because you're managing more than just aim and damage. And I think that's the part that keeps the game from just becoming automatic. You're looking at the enemies, the darkness, the goat head, the space around you, and how much room you have to move. The game keeps asking you to react to the whole area instead of just whatever is directly in front of Garcia. That extra layer gives these fights a messier kind of energy, and the same as everything else, the combat is fast and hectic. Enemies come at you in tight spaces, small arenas, narrow paths. The game usually keeps you close to the action, so you're making space as much as you're dealing damage. When darkness is involved, that pressure gets sharper because the room is taking something from you while the enemies are getting closer. That's where the game finds its own kind of tension. It has the horror imagery, but any fear in the game usually comes through pressure and reacting to the darkness. The game wants you moving, aiming, cleansing, backing up, finding light, and trying to stay ahead of whatever the room's doing. It's more frantic than patient, and that fits the way the rest of the game's built.
That cheeky imp! He doused our goat!
Then let's put out some lights of our own.
And the sound really pushes that even harder. The game can get really chaotic in the middle of a fight. The music leans into these harsh guitars, screams, screeching, and just distorted noises. It gives combat this violent, messy edge, especially when you're consumed in darkness, with enemies rushing you. That soundscape does a lot for the feeling of danger. The mechanics under all this are easy to understand, but the way it all sounds and moves makes those simple rules feel more intense than they are on the surface. And I think that's where the system works best. It gives the game a pressure point. The levels are direct, the objectives are usually easy to understand, and the combat is built around always moving forward. Darkness gives it all a little bit more bite. It makes you think about where you're standing, where safety is, and how quickly you can take control of the area. It also fits the world thematically. In a game this loud and crazy, light still has a clear purpose. It gives Garcia a way to fight back against the environment itself. It makes the darkness feel like part of the level and the enemy design, and part of the rhythm of just moving through hell.
Well, would you look at that? The darkness really did a number on that brute.
One of the stranger pacing choices in the game is the cartoon side-scrolling shooter sections. They show up almost like the game is interrupting itself on purpose. For a few minutes, the whole format changes, and it just completely changes the game. But what makes those sections work better is that they still use ideas the game has already taught you. You're still shooting enemies, dealing with darkness, still cleansing what needs to be cleansed, and still picking up gems and moving through the stage with the same basic understanding of how this world works. The perspective changes, but the rules carry over. And I think that detail specifically is very important, because the side-scroller sections could have easily felt like the game leaving itself behind for a few minutes. Instead, they feel more like a strange remix of what you've already been doing. It's the same basic language, just flattened into this cartoony shooting gallery. That doesn't mean they land perfectly every time though. The main game has a strong rhythm, and these cartoon sections can feel a bit awkward when they show up. They break up the pacing, and depending on where you are in the game, that break can either feel refreshing or a bit rough. But I do really think they fit the personality of the game. So after all of that, when you actually lay out the story of Shadows of the Damned, it's pretty easy to follow. Garcia Hotspur is a demon hunter, and completely locked in on one thing, Paula. She's the woman he loves, and the whole story starts moving because Fleming takes her from him.
I would blow your head off nicely.
Let her go. But can't you see the little peach is coming on to me?
Fleming is the Lord of Demons, and he works as the main villain because he fits the world so well. He's cruel and arrogant and just strange in the exact way the game needs him to be. He shows up, takes Paula, drags her into the Underworld, and basically turns the whole thing into a challenge for Garcia. That gives the story its main shape. Garcia goes into hell to get Paula. That's the spine of the plot. He moves through the Underworld, fights through whatever Fleming throws at him, and keeps pushing towards the castle where Paula's being held. And honestly, I feel like that simplicity really helps this game. The story always gives us a clear reason to keep moving. Garcia wants Paula back. Fleming wants to punish him. Johnson keeps the trip moving by talking Garcia through the world, reacting to everything, and giving the whole thing that back and forth energy. The game doesn't really need a complicated plot engine because the presentation is doing so much of the work. Paula, though, is a bit different. For most of the game, she works more like the emotional center of the rescue than a fully developed co-lead. She appears, disappears, gets tormented, and keeps pulling Garcia deeper into hell. The game uses her as motivation, pain, and as this symbol of what Garcia is willing to keep chasing. And as the story goes on, it starts adding more weight to who she actually is. Garcia and Johnson learned about the Unbreakable Huntress, a female demon hunter who challenged Fleming. She fought him, lost, and Fleming became obsessed with her defiance. The story around her is pretty brutal. Fleming keeps her close, makes her his queen, and kills her over and over while bringing her back to life. The game lays it out pretty clear that Paula is that woman. That changes the rescue story a bit. Garcia is still fighting to save the woman he loves, but Paula is carrying a history that is much bigger and darker than he understands at first. She is tied to Fleming in a way that goes beyond being kidnapped at the start of the game. That's where the ending becomes more interesting than the basic setup makes it sound. Garcia finally reaches Fleming at the Castle of Hassel, and the game pushes everything towards that final confrontation. Fleming has been the thing at the top of the whole climb, so fighting him feels like the natural endpoint of the rescue. Garcia beats him, gets to Paula, and for a second, it feels like the story's reached the place where it was heading. Then Paula's anger comes out. She lashes out at Garcia because from her side of it, he watched her die again and again while fighting his way through hell. That moment reframes some of the journey because Garcia saw her pain as something he had to reach, while Paula experienced it as something she had to suffer through. Then she transforms.
Why didn't you console me? Why did you let me die each time? Tell me why!
The final fight with Paula gives the ending this strange, kind of sad edge. Garcia's been fighting to reach her the whole game, and now he has to fight her too. It still fits the tone of Shadows of the Damned because the game takes something emotional and wraps it in this loud, ugly, crazy boss fight. After the fight, Paula returns to herself and Garcia confronts her. That moment gives the ending a little bit of softness after everything the game's thrown at us. Garcia apologizes, Paula is wounded, and the darkness closes around them. For a game this crude and just loud and chaotic, that scene lands because it finally lets the rescue story calm down for a second. Then the epilogue pulls it back into the game's real personality. Garcia and Paula are back home, and it seems like they made it out. Then Fleming calls. More demons are coming. Garcia basically accepts that this is his life now, because he's with the Lord of Demons' mistress, and that means hell is always going to be looking for him. That ending feels right for Garcia, I think. He doesn't really get a clean victory. He gets Paula back, and then he accepts the fight that comes with her. That's very much who he is. He's stubborn, loyal, and reckless enough to keep fighting forever if that's what loving her means. And I think that's where the story's really cool. It starts as a rescue mission through hell, then reveals that Paula's connection to Fleming has been sitting underneath the whole thing. The plot stays really easy to follow, but the ending gives it this darker loop. Garcia saves her, but loving her means being tied to the Underworld from that point forward.
Until she is mine alone. I will take on the whole world if I must. Slay every creature in my path. Because I still see love in her eyes.
When the game came out in 2011, I think it landed in one of those weird places where the game clearly had something to it, and the market just didn't turn that into momentum. And this is where I think it becomes a good example of something people talk about a lot now. You'll hear people say modern AAA games have no soul, no risk or personality. And I get where that comes from. A lot of people are reacting to games that feel safe or overly managed. But I also think it's easy to forget that games at this scale are still a business. They're art, absolutely, but they're also products with publishers, budgets, marketing plans, sales expectations, and people behind the scenes who need the thing to make money. So when a game like Shadows of the Damned comes out, full of personality and strange creative choices, that passion matters. It gives the game life, but it also has to survive the reality of what a major console release needed to do in 2011.
You see, I'm what you call a mixture of beast and human. Oh, best of both worlds, my pappy said.
And critically, the game landed decently. Metacritic has the PS3 version at a 77 with generally favorable reviews. And that feels pretty close to the way the game was talked about at the time. It doesn't seem like it was being treated like some broken failure of a game. A lot of critics could see the style. Game Informer's review really captures the side of the response that connected with it. They called it vulgar, violent, and over the top, and talked about it like this goofy road trip into hell that knew exactly what kind of ride it wanted to be. I think that's the positive way to look at Shadows of the Damned. For the right person, the tone wasn't a problem, it was the main hook. The Guardian had a similar reaction, where they recognized how unusual it was. Their review described the game as familiar in some ways, especially if you understood the Resident Evil-style action horror structure, while also feeling strange because of the world and tone around it. That's a pretty good summary of where the game sat critically, I think. People understood the pieces, and the full package still felt unusual. So the stuff that worked feels pretty clear. The game had an identity, a voice, had Garcia and Johnson carrying the trip with banter. It had Yamaoka's sound giving the whole thing this ugly, loud atmosphere. And it had enough action horror structure to make it playable and familiar, and enough grasshopper weirdness to make it feel like its own thing. That's the soul of the game. You can feel people making creative choices here. Even when parts of it are rough, there's a personality underneath it that a lot of bigger releases would kill to have. And then we get to the part to where that same personality starts narrowing the audience. The humor was always going to filter people. All the dirty jokes, the vulgarity, the whole Garcia Johnson dynamic. That either really clicks with you, or it's going to bounce off fast. And the game gives you a lot of it. It commits to that tone from start to finish at full throttle. The structure also had some issues that people noticed. The Guardian pointed out that the game could feel disjointed, with some clunky dialogue and old-fashioned feel, especially in a release with no online element. And that part is important here. In 2011, a lot of major console games were being judged on a few things: the replay value, online modes, and how much content they offered around the core campaign. Game Informer was very positive overall though, and even that review pointed to some rough spots late in the game, especially around the heavy arena fights, the chase sequences, and the lack of New Game Plus. So even the people who liked it could still see where there were some issues. That's where the audience fit really starts to make sense, I think. For horror fans, the game was very action forward. For shooter fans, it was strange, linear, and heavily built around its own sense of humor. For people looking for a big 2011 package with online features or a lot of modern variety, this was a much more focused campaign. And for people who are already open to this kind of weirdness, that same focus was probably the part of the appeal. So I don't really think the issue was lack of quality. It was a game with a very specific shape, a strong identity, attitude, style, a tone that asked people to meet it where it was. And at a business level, that kind of narrow appeal can become a real problem. That shows up in the sales numbers. Wired reported that Shadows of the Dam sold around 24,000 copies in June 2011, across both Xbox 360 and PS3. That is a hard number to look at for a major console release. Wired even pointed out that that number was especially rough because the game had 2 platforms to pull from. And that's really the difference between passion and momentum. A game can have soul, it can review fine. A game can have people who genuinely love it. But for a release at this level, the early audience still has to be big enough to carry it forward. Word of mouth needs people. A future needs sales. A publisher needs evidence that the game can grow beyond the first wave of players. Shadows of the Damned had the personality, it just didn't have the reach. And I really think that's the easiest way to look at why it struggled to grow. It wasn't empty or careless, it wasn't some soulless product pushed out with no identity. It was almost the opposite. It had so much identity that the audience became smaller. That's the strange thing about a game like this. The exact thing that makes it special is also the thing that makes it harder to sell. The specific type of humor, the weird tone, linear structure, the action horror focus, the personality, all of that. All of that gave the game its soul. All of that also made the commercial lane tighter than a publisher like EA probably needed it to be. So when we talk about why this game never became bigger in 2011, I think the answer is this. The game had a soul, but soul alone couldn't carry it past the business reality around it. Years later, the game sits pretty comfortably in that hidden gem category. And I think that's the right place for it. It's one of those games that comes up when people talk about the 360 and PS3 era and all the strange one-off projects that came out during that time. The kind of game someone recommends with a very specific person in mind. Horror shooter fans, third-person shooter fans, people who like going back to that generation and finding the games that slip past the wider conversation. That's where Shadows of the Damned found its afterlife. It stayed alive through people who remembered it. I think that matters because plenty of games came out, struggle, and then just disappear. This one kept getting brought up. Maybe in smaller circles, or people who already knew what kind of game they were recommending, but the conversation never fully went away. And eventually, that led to the remaster. In October 2024, the game came back as Shadows of the Damned Hella Remastered. It's on Steam right now, you can go get it. And it added New Game Plus, new costumes, 60 frames per second, and 4K support. I really think New Game Plus is probably the most meaningful addition here though. For a game built around upgrades, weapon evolution, and just carrying progression forward, that feature really makes sense. It gives the game a bit more reason to replay it, but I also feel like it's one of those additions that probably should have been there from the start. So seeing it added later really helps the remaster feel more complete. The bigger point here though is the remaster happened at all. A game with that kind of rough commercial start still had enough memory behind it to come back over a decade later. That says something. Maybe it never had a massive audience, but it had an audience that kept it alive long enough for the game to get another chance. And then there's Kudayami. I talked earlier about how Shadows of the Dam came out of that earlier concept, and that piece of the story has its own afterlife too. Some of those ideas later carried into Kuriyami Dance, a manga written by Suda. It ran from 2015 to 2016 and is tied to Kuriyami, the concept that eventually changed into Shadows of the Damned. I think that's worth bringing up here because it shows how long this Project Shadow really is. The version that became a game is one path, the earlier concept finding life through a manga is another. So even after all the changes, revisions, compromises, the original idea still had enough weight to keep moving somewhere else. That makes the legacy a little more interesting to me. Shadows of the Damned is easier to place now. At release, it had to survive as a new product in 2011. Now, it can be looked at as part of a specific era, a strange action horror game from a generation that still had room for projects like this to exist on major consoles. That's probably why I'd still call it a must-play for the right audience. If you look at horror shooters, older third-person action games, or cult games from that era, this is one that feels worth experiencing. It also works best when you go in understanding the lane it belongs to. This is a specific recommendation for a specific kind of person. And honestly, that feels like the right legacy for it. It came out, struggled to grow, stayed alive through the people who cared about it, came back through a remaster, and still carries the trace of an earlier idea that found its way into a manga. For a game this strange and over the top, that path feels fitting.
Y'all take care now.
And that's Shadows of the Damned. I really appreciate y'all hanging out with me for a bit. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe to the channel and stick around the save room for a bit. There's already a ton of content like this up, and there's a lot more coming. And if you want to help this video grow, leaving a like, dropping a comment, or sharing it around really does go a long way. Let me know what you thought about this game, especially if you played it back in the day or checked out the remaster. Also want to give a massive shout out to all the save room members and to everyone who supported the stream for this game with super chats. I never expect anyone to become a member, but for the people who do want to support the channel that way, I really do appreciate you. I recently updated the membership tiers also. I feel like they have a bit more value now, so I'll run through those just real quick since it's new. Tier 1 gets the member badges, emojis, members only videos, which are only going to be Let's Plays, and right now the current series is Dark Souls. Shoutouts like this one, and early access to videos whenever I have them finished ahead of schedule. Tier 2 gets all of that, plus once a month you'll be able to play a game with me. For that one, you do need to be in the Discord so we can actually set everything up. Tier 3 is what I'm calling the Save Room Blueprint. That gets everything from the first two tiers, plus access to the notes I make while recording these games and the sources I use when putting the videos together. Again, I'm not asking anyone to become a member, just wanted to make sure that if someone does want to support the channel that way, I'm giving something back that actually has some value. But again, thank you for being here, thank you for watching, and as always, I'll see y'all later.
The darkness is coming.